All right. Are we ready? All right. Cool. Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Blockchain Socialist Podcast. I am here at Offline, which is a very neat space in Berlin. I highly recommend people check it out, offline.place, if you're in the area. They have really great events. And we are here because of my comrade Giulio from the Crypto Commons Association has been working on a project called the Commons Economy Roadmap, which he'll explain to us. And together we're going to speak to Chris Goss, who is the co-founder of Anoma. So maybe to start off, I'll let Giulio explain a bit and introduce the Commons Economy Roadmap and the project and how this all relates to a lot of the neat stuff that is going on at Anoma.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Excited to do an episode together, finally, after 3 years of events and knowing each other.
It's also important to notice that the Crypto Commons Association is a part of Redchain Cooperative.
So, the Commons Economy Roadmap, briefly, is a research and promotion project. We selected 20 projects that we consider the most interesting and relevant and commons-oriented of the blockchain space, but not only blockchain. And we are generating basically basic knowledge on them, like we call them project cards, and you can look on them on our website. And then extra materials like articles and interviews like this. So this is the first podcast interview with a media partner, which is the Blockchain Socialist. And Anoma is one of the 20 projects. And thank you for contributing to this first iteration. And that's it. Yeah, in this episode, we will dive deep into Anoma, try to understand it better. And yeah.
So maybe, Chris, if you want to just introduce a bit of yourself and what Anoma is, and then we'll start digging into, we'll try to bridge the gap with a lot of the really interesting and crazy technical innovations you guys are working on with kind of what is the like socio-political implications of what this means.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me. I'm honored, perhaps a little nervous. So my name is Christopher. I've been working, I don't know, in crypto. It's always hard to delineate where that space is, but I've been working at least in protocol design for a little while. Specifically before Anoma, I worked on Cosmos projects on IBC, the Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol. I did a little bit of work on Zcash, the Zcash community, even on Ethereum. And so those projects in particular have informed my view of what's possible. And then in 2021, Adrian, my co-founders, and I decided to start Anoma. Honestly, at the time, I think we did not know exactly what Anoma was or would become. You can go, we're very, pedantic about keeping all of our original documents published from the original dates and not changing them so that people can see how our thinking has evolved over time. I don't know.
Are they on the blockchain?
What?
Are them on the blockchain?
They're in Git, which is kind of like the OG blockchain.
Okay,
so in some sense,
cool.
They're not, not on the Ethereum blockchain. And perhaps if someone notarized all Git repository hashes, they would be. But in the original kind of Anoma vision paper, I was really interested, then we all were, in the question of money and why, at least we felt in some kind of intuitive way, that the global system of money just wasn't working very well for coordination. Like, it wasn't actually helping people address their needs. It was creating a lot of confusion or sort of measures of accounting that don't have very much to do with how people actually feel. A lot of the system is kind of out of alignment with what's happening on the ground. I spent a lot of time reading a combination of philosophy and information science and kind of what you might call like socioeconomics and political theory as two different reasons as to why that was the case. I read a lot about surveillance capitalism. Zubat has a great book on this. Just different theories of what individuality actually is from the information theory perspective. There is what language is, Robert Brandon, some other, these are all citations in the vision paper, but just to give you a sense of where this kind of language comes from. So at that point, we set out to kind of try and build a project that would quote unquote undefine money. And at the time, the actual thing outlined in the vision paper basically tries to articulate what it would take to make a technological system that can just allow us to do bartering. So that can like handle one challenge with bartering is finding double coincidence of wants. So finding like, if I have a sandwich and want a coffee, I need to find someone who has a coffee and wants a sandwich in order to swap. This can be difficult. And in particular, it's just computationally difficult. Like if you don't have someone assisting you in finding this person, or maybe finding multiple people so you can trade in a ring, it's difficult to do this. And this is at least one explanation that is sometimes given as to why, money exists. So at the time, we kind of set out to build like some kind of technological system that could just allow users to offload all of this computational complexity of executing a barter and figure out, what kind of ring trades were possible, what complex configurations of preferences, which back then we called intents, could be combined together and put into a state transition that everyone would be happy with. For example, maybe, I want a sandwich, I have a coffee, you have a coffee, you want a donut, you have a donut, you want a sandwich, the three of us can all swap.
Go fly.
Exactly. And all of our preferences would be satisfied. So the thing that's outlined in the Anoma vision paper in some ways is actually somewhat more crazy than the thing we ended up actually building. Since that time, I read some more anthropology, and I've concluded that this like theory of money emerges as a solution to double coincidence of wants is bunk. It appears to have been like cribbed by Adam Smith from some Middle Eastern thinker's random book. It's not based in a lot of history. And thanks to reading David Graeber and just the history of credit economies, also good friends with Ethan Buckman, the people who work at various areas in the Ko-Fi, and I've benefited a lot from them. I guess, at least personally, I've come to an understanding of a theory of money that's much more around kind of different denominations of credit. Credit emerging as a solution to this. There is a real problem with double coincidence once, but early societies simply solved it by integrating over time, right? Instead of by trying to find, cows and chickens and sandwiches all at some time in the market, which they didn't need to do because they had like deep relations of trust, right? So that kind of understanding, plus, I think around the time of the vision paper, we were kind of like, well, money is evil. We should like get rid of the concept. Like we should build a system that just doesn't use numerical abstraction at all. And I think there's still something to that. Like there are probably cases where you don't want numerical abstraction or where you want less. But I also think that it may not be necessary to go that far. Like my understanding at the moment is more, a big problem right now is not there's numerical abstraction per se, but that there's like one number, like the US dollar, and everyone is using that. One dimension of numerical abstraction versus many dimensions of numerical abstraction, which represent different things. These are very different systems. Right? And I'm not sure if I would expect numerical abstraction to like completely go away. Like I still think it has its uses. We don't want an accounting system that represents everything exactly. We can accept some lostness.
Can you just?
This is a long.
And I think I think about the listeners. These attempts to overcome fiat money and crypto money and tokens and use credit instead, which basically is like you change the numbers on the ledgers without moving tokens or moving money. It's called collaborative finance, and there are resources online. Maybe we will share them in the description. I think we don't have time to explain today, but like for Anoma, it takes a bit to get in the mindset of like moving away from commodity theory of money and moving toward credit. So yeah.
I did an
interview. We did a Ko-Fi event here in this place in March. We were here and it was cool, and we will show the recording as well. So
sure. I was just gonna say I did an interview with Ethan Buckman and the team at Informal Systems about collaborative finance, so people can check out that episode as well to learn a bit about the idea is basically credit clearing. Imagine what banks are able to do with credit clearing, but instead extending that to like individuals, essentially.
Yeah, it was because it seems like naive or utopian, but we're not saying to just drop the existing monetary system and do bartering. It's more like starting to use these new tools in complementarily with the existing tools, and then progressively we can move more and more towards just not money.
Right. I would even personally like consider the existing money system to already be a credit money system, just one in which special parties, namely banks, have the authority to issue credit money and nobody else does.
Right. I'd say like banks get the credit, whereas we get the commodity in some kind of, or we experience it as a commodity.
Yeah, I mean, if you hold, for example, T-bills directly, you can, like, people can hold credit directly.
Right.
But most people in practice don't. Most people are holding, or they're holding secondary credit, holding like bank promises that are, they might say backed, but like in some sense supposed to be promises about the US dollar. And there are some laws that try to enforce that they will be, whether or not they succeed. It's not my area of expertise, but often these are tertiary or like further sort of credit derivatives along the original asset.
Yeah.
But so continuing on this, so like basically you guys went in with, I mean, it sounds to me, I would argue like a very, very different view on money than is kind of like the, I mean, just the average crypto person like thinks about money. Like, like the average person is either very like, let's go back to the gold standard, or I mean, if they're maybe slightly more well-read, maybe they're into Hayek or something like that, which I also think is like problematic because it's like I mean, basically what you're saying, I think he would say that prices are like the perfect, it's like computation of like all these factors, and then we compute the price through the market, and this like gives you a number that then you can coordinate with, and money is a coordination system that like, but there is like a lot to say about like this not really taking in all the information that's available, but instead actually just like being a blunt instrument for enforcing like things to move forward on the market. Because it doesn't consider like the environmental damage that like whatever the production of a particular commodity does, or like whatever else. So a lot of these things in economics, they just move to the side and say those are externalities. So this is like, I think part of the issue with like the monetary system is like this lack of, that it is actually a very bad computer for computing what should and ought to happen and real pricing of things.
Right. I mean, prices are just some kind of signal.
Right.
And what kind of information that signal tracks depends on the whole causal path that like leads to the price, right?
Yeah.
And if you have, a system that externalizes things, almost by definition, and certainly in practice, you're not incorporating them into your price. So I guess to me, I wouldn't say that like prices are inherently incapable of representing such information, but just that in the current economic system, in the current way, for example, if we put source taxes on carbon emissions, prices would incorporate this information.
Right.
Because we don't have such taxes, prices don't. So maybe that's a distinction.
But that would require like a legal kind of like, enforcement of that, which is also very anti-libertarian, like which a lot of crypto people would then be against. But then it's like, okay, then we're not considering this damage as part of like the price signal that we're receiving through the market. But anyways, like if we move forward, like how do you see Anoma trying to, think about this?
Right. So I think it is helpful to draw a distinction between like the semantics of how particular assets are used as money and the syntax of what the database system actually does. And Anoma only makes decisions about syntax. It doesn't make decisions about semantics. So for example, that a particular symbol represents like credit. There's like some promise in the real world to, for example, the US dollar is at least credit in the sense that you can use it to pay your tax liabilities. The US government has implicitly and explicitly made a promise that this symbol, if you have some, can be used to like clear your tax liabilities. That promise doesn't exist like in the database. So there's a database of who holds a bunch of dollars, blah, 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 and nothing in that database can say anything about that promise. That promise is just a social systems thing that everyone understands, written down in law, or understood conceptually, right? And the same distinction holds for Anoma. So Anoma is a database system. And in the database system, we, of course, consider these theories of money when designing it, but nothing in the database system like says that a particular asset is correct, right? Or something like this. I think that
it's like one could say that it's agnostic to the value definition of the agents using it. It's like just a mediator between the different agents' value expression.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a bit abstract, but I can try to do some examples.
So Anoma works with this concept that we call an intent. And an intent in our terminology and our mathematical definitions is a declarative statement of preferences and constraints for some kind of change you want to happen to the state of the system as a user. So you could have an intent that says, oh, I want to, trade 5 DAI for 5 ETH. I want to get at least 5 ETH. That's kind of constraint, but I'm happier the more ETH I get. That's a preference, right? And you could send that intent into Anoma, and by into Anoma here, I'm talking about the network. So it's sent over the peer-to-peer network. It goes around to different parties. These parties, some of whom we call solvers, can look at that intent and try to match it with another intent, like maybe someone wants to swap 5 ETH, 5 DAI bread.
That'd be an incredible price.
Well, price signals can change. And then a solver can take that intent, take the 2 intents, match them together, and create a transaction. So Anoma covers everything from kind of this syntactical definition of intent in constraints and preferences, all the way to how that gets gossiped around the network, how that gets matched, how that gets settled. What sort of semantics, the fact that now the ledger has changed and now I have 5 more ETH and 5 less bread or something like this, what that change in the ledger means in terms of real world promises, Anoma itself doesn't say. This is up to users using the system.
So maybe to summarize a bit, Anoma is I went to the talk by, I think, your other co-founder Adrian at DAppCon, and I think it's an intent-centric architecture. If I'm not mistaken, Anoma is not itself a blockchain. It is a kind of protocol for basically, I was telling you earlier, an intent almost sounds like you make a wish. You intend for something to happen, for some sort of state change. Like, I would like X to happen. I would like, I think the easiest kind of example of that is basically a trade, that you want, 5 ETH for 5 bread or something like that. And you intend that out, you send that out to all the robots out there, which you call solvers. And the solvers are kind of crawling the space of other intents that they can match up. Basically a kind of very complex coincidence of wants type of situation that then if they find a match, then they kind of ignites a whole trail of trades or whatever you have, and then once it's cryptographically proven that this can happen, it simply happens.
An example for people less into crypto, maybe, and you can tell me if it's right or wrong. I don't think it will be literally this, but let's say if I want to, we are in Berlin, I want to order a kebab, and there are, I don't know, 5 delivery apps, and instead of going through all of them, theoretically through the Anoma protocol, I could say to Anoma, I have €7 max, give me the best kebab, and the protocol, the solver, goes through check all the platforms, and then they execute the order and they give it back to me.
Right.
No,
I mean,
okay,
absolutely.
because I don't think it's counterparty discovery for people. Maybe it's not super visible.
I think that's a good example. I guess what I want to demystify a little bit, because I really, technology has magical properties in some sense, but it also, at least in the sense that we want to build it, should really be discretely analyzable. Users should be able to know exactly what will and won't happen as a result of their interaction with the system. So one kind of thing I just want to note there is the only thing Anoma is really doing is helping you find counterparties and kind of agree on the change to the state of the system in fancy and complex and ways that require serious design to do correctly, but that's ultimately what it's doing. It's just helping you find. So, there's no, Anoma does not produce kebabs, right? Someone produces kebabs.
Yet.
And those people, they produce kebabs because they choose to produce kebabs, and some other people might choose to try to get kebabs that offer money or other things in exchange for them. And the only thing Anoma is doing is helping these people find each other, right? It's not itself, it's not a robot. It's not doing anything other than that. Then I want to kind of, on this question of, is Anoma a blockchain? The word blockchain, of course, words are used in the social context that know
it's a loaded term.
Single meaning that many things. And the word blockchain started out as, it was not in fact used in Satoshi's white paper. I don't know how it became. He used the word distributed timestamping server, which is so much more clear. So I don't know how the word blockchain became about, but as it was originally used, a blockchain was just a data structure, right? It's like a linked list of blocks that hash linked to each other. As a data structure, like, I don't know, it's fine. I don't have strong opinions towards data structures. Like, data structures are like numbers. It's like when you hear the word blockchain, think like the number like 72. It's like,
there are some numbers that are better than others.
Okay. Still. I like to practice numerical neutrality, right? So, all numbers are equal. Not to each other, but so okay, in the sense of the word blockchain has come to be kind of a metonym for the space, which includes many things that are not in fact just linked lists of blocks of data structures. I think this use is just super confusing, and I don't like using it personally because I think it makes the systems harder to explain. It's kind of like if you think of a car, right? So in this analogy, some complex system like Ethereum or Cosmos or Anoma is like the whole car, like it has a bunch of different parts. And some of those parts, or one of those parts, is the data structure of a blockchain. So a blockchain to Ethereum, to Cosmos, or to Anoma is like the rubber in the wheel to your car, as in describing the car as the rubber. It's not exactly like, it's not totally wrong.
It's not the whole picture.
The rubber is a component of the car. But not only is it not the whole picture, it doesn't illustrate anything about what the purpose of the system actually is, right? Like if you explain your car by starting to talk about the chemical compounds in the wheel, that's very similar to trying to explain what the purpose of a blockchain is by starting to talk about the specific data structure. Like there are no magic properties of the data structure. I think so. In this sense, I think it's confusing. Over time, as we've gone back and discovered more of the research literature, I think the discipline that connects most to like what Anoma actually is more like distributed operating systems design. Like there are a bunch of computers, you want to network them together, and you want to provide a kind of unified abstraction to users so that they can treat those many computers, not exactly as if they were one, but at least as if they were like a connected system or a connected network. And you can write programs that can be run on many of these computers, and you will care about which computers they're run on, but it's like a unified abstraction layer. Just like you don't need to write, now you don't need to write different code for each individual CPU. A long time ago you did. You had to write different assembly code for each CPU before they came up with standardized instruction sets and operating systems on top of them that abstract like the file system and stuff like this.
Maybe we can explore more your framing of a third generation protocol. Like Bitcoin is the first, like only tokens, and then Ethereum second generation smart contract with the tokens, and then there's been a lot of innovations with all the layer 2 and rollups and whatever. And now Anoma seems like to be the third generation protocol, which you can explain what you mean.
Yeah. I mean, in this context, so of course this is a little bit of a simplification. There are like lots of things that came before, and we draw inspiration from many areas. Probably the 3 protocols Anoma draws most from, like maybe 4: Bitcoin, Ethereum, Zcash, Cosmos, simple like this. By third generation, so Bitcoin started with just kind of, Bitcoin actually is a little bit programmable, but it's like scriptable settlement. You can send your Bitcoin around, you can use Bitcoin scripts to do simple things, time locks. It's got a little bit more capable over time, but there were no, attempts to build other assets on Bitcoin. Colored coins mostly didn't work. It's not clear as to whether the reasons for this were primarily technical or cultural, but at least Bitcoin like definitely treated other assets as sort of second-class things. Like BTC, the asset, was the main deal, and everything else, kind of had to hack in order to get anything to work. So Ethereum brought programmable settlement with smart contracts, so you could write code and control different assets, but it's still like one blockchain, right? So you're still, when you use Ethereum, you're always accepting like the trust assumption of the Ethereum validator set, and you're always paying to have your transactions ordered with like all of these other transactions that are also going to the Ethereum chain. So Anoma kind of into this, it builds on these. It of course involves, we don't call them smart contracts, but it involves programs that developers write, but it's adds 2 ingredients, which I think are particularly important. One is heterogeneous trust. So rather than being one chain, Anoma is it's, I think, easier to think of it as just a network where different participants in the network can agree to run different consensi whenever they want, right? So when you run an Ethereum node, you start a node and that node like connects to the Ethereum blockchain, it downloads the Ethereum blocks, and it just processes the Ethereum blockchain, like it's dealing with one chain, right? Whereas when you start an Anoma node, that node connects to the Anoma network, which has, many chains. And the chains are, we think of blockchains as these very like long-lived things, right? Like you start the chain, then it goes forever. Anoma doesn't really have this conception. So blockchains might be like you have a blockchain for an hour, right? Or you may, we would understand, the consensus and the linked list of blocks as really corresponding to what state transitions you actually want to order with respect to one another, because ordering is very expensive. So the more you can like order unrelated things in different places, just the cheaper the system is for users. Mm-hmm. So to make this example much more concrete, imagine that you wanted to play like digital Settlers of Catan, right? The game Settlers of Catan, pretty complex game. Mm-hmm. You could write its logic up digitally. Maybe you want to play with friends over the internet. And when you're playing Settlers of Catan, maybe you even want to bet like $5 on the game or bet a sandwich or something like this. You want some interactions with the exchange system. But while you're playing the game, you don't need to send your transactions to some global blockchain, right? You're playing with friends, you probably like trust each other enough that you can use your own consensus score to run the game. Maybe you even want to play it offline. You don't want to be connected to the global internet all the time or not need to be. And you don't want to pay like expensive global transaction fees for every time you make a move in the game. It would make the whole thing infeasible. So in a Anoma world, this would be what we call a fractal instance, or a like temporary chain that you start when you start the game, and you run a bunch of state transitions, which are free. Like you don't need to pay gas, or maybe there's gas, but you don't need to pay like tokens as fees because you all just trust each other enough in the system. Mm-hmm. And then when you're done, you have kind of a compact proof of all the state changes that took place, maybe who won the game, and you can submit this elsewhere. So if you just run Anoma nodes on your phones or your computers, that's sufficient to kind of use the system in this kind of way, if that makes sense. That's the heterogeneous trust aspect. Mm-hmm. So allowing users to express like who they want to trust for different particular interactions, who they want to trust to do ordering, to do storage, to do computation, and the requisite networking components to allow the whole system to communicate, even when we don't assume that like everyone in the network shares trust assumptions, right? Mm-hmm. Ethereum assumes that everyone shares some trust assumptions. We assume that people have different trust assumptions and have a bunch of protocols that kind of help them figure out when their trust assumptions match enough to allow them to interact. Mm-hmm. So that's heterogeneous trust angle. Then the other ingredient which Anoma adds is information flow control. And information flow control is kind of like if you think about privacy is thinking about hiding things, information flow control is the inverse angle. It's like how you think about what you want to reveal, which I think is closer to the choices that we have as users of these kinds of distributed systems. We always choose what to reveal. And information flow control in our usage, which is sort of inspired by the academic research discipline of the same name, which we draw a lot from, is oriented around giving users very precise control over what is disclosed, both in their initial interactions with the network and in subsequent interactions that are kind of mediated. Like as a user, if I send my intent to a solver, I might want that solver to look for a match, but then not to like broadcast the intent to everybody else, mm-hmm. right? Maybe I trust you a little bit as a solver, and I'm willing to give you some information about what my preferences are, on hope and belief that you will not use that information against me, or you will not use it to record me to someone who might not like what I'm doing or stuff like this. Mm-hmm. And information flow control gives me at least the ability to state what I want very clearly to you, so you can follow those preferences if you want. Mm-hmm. So those are the two aspects that we add.
So maybe if I can try to summarize some of that for people. Anoma is a protocol that is not a blockchain. So it doesn't have like a universal state in itself. Right. Simply based on how users are using it, I guess, like it will use a blockchain perhaps for the amount of time that maybe you need a blockchain for, which could also be hyperlocal in many ways. So that also doesn't have to be part of the universal state of Anoma. But since you're using this protocol with other people, maybe you can have your own little blockchain for a moment that you need for your game or something like that. And there are certain trust assumptions whenever you're more local than when you are global. So it makes me think of like permissioned blockchains almost, type of discourse that was like more prevalent years ago. Uh-huh. And so with that, you have a lot more customizability in trust assumptions with the types of consensus you can use for particular moments. And as well, therefore, that means you can control a lot more information and like how it's revealed to people and among each other. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think another frame that can be helpful is that Anoma is really driven by demand side design instead of supply side design. So mostly blockchains are kind of like supply side driven right now. Like someone starts a blockchain, and then you as a user can like look at the blockchains on offer and decide what you want to use. Right. Whereas in Anoma, you describe in your intent like kind of what blockchain you would like to use, like who you would like to run consensus, and what promises you would like them to make, even or what data they keep, keep private or reveal, and you can describe that blockchain even before it exists, right? Like these parties might not have run consensus together yet. They might not have made such promises, but you can say like, I would like such a thing to exist. Maybe even if you run it for me, I will pay you something or other. And those parties can decide, they can decide whether they want to do that or not.
Does that mean in part that like Anoma is almost like can also be wrapped around existing blockchains at the moment, and therefore can communicate? It almost sounds like also a universal bridge. And potentially,
yeah. I mean, it's one could call it like a distributed database abstraction layer or a universal abstraction layer for applications which wants to have state on different existing blockchains and perhaps some new ones. It's not. The word bridge sometimes is used now to indicate like a particular place where assets are sent through, like a physical bridge. You start on one side of the river, you walk across the bridge, you go to the other side of the river. And during part of that, you're like on the bridge and you're accepting the bridge's security assumptions. If the bridge breaks, you're in trouble. That metaphor applies accurately. It's like the way people use the word bridge in the blockchain space currently, but it doesn't apply to Anoma in this case. As in, if you're using Anoma to interoperate between Ethereum and Cosmos, for example, it's more like there's like an Anoma contract on Ethereum, which we call a protocol adapter, and some kind of Anoma contract on Cosmos, and these like virtualize. So it's like when you run a virtual machine on your computer, when you run the Java virtual machine, then your computer can run Java programs. And there are different Java virtual machine implementations or, Windows and x86, 64-bit CPUs, ARM CPUs, stuff like this, but they all provide like, once you have a Java virtual machine implementation, you can run all Java programs. And Anoma is more like this. So running a Java virtual machine on your laptop doesn't mean that you send your data to some microsystems or call it now, but it does mean that you have this universal interface. The application is going to be standardized.
So then is Anoma more like then I hear you describing it as more like a programming language and not necessarily as like does Anoma need nodes that run the Anoma network? So at the same time.
I mean, I definitely expect that there will be, and there are lots of, people might want a lot of consensi that don't currently exist. I would put it like that.
Okay.
So if the only thing that everyone wants is like the current Ethereum consensus, then maybe the only Anoma that everyone uses is the one that has a protocol adapter deployed on Ethereum.
Okay. So then, okay. Then there has to be people running like part of this network in order to be able to basically grants people's intents on the network for that to happen. So people will do it, and I assume either they're getting paid somehow or whatever else, but they're incentivized then to like make your wish come true.
Yeah, I mean, there's no, just as we assume no universal set of trust assumptions, we assume no universal asset or no universal set of preferences. So it's difficult to use the word incentivize in some of our design contexts because we just assume that everyone has different preferences. So we can't incentivize someone if you don't know what they want.
Undefined incentives.
Or user-defined incentives.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Users can express. You can express conditional promises in your basically. You can say, like, I will run a blockchain for you if you pay me asset X, right?
Right.
And then someone can say, I trust them enough, and that price is reasonable. I'll pay them.
Like that could be Ethereum. That could be love.
Right.
I was thinking that maybe now some of the listeners may be confused because we went very abstract. But it also, I think, is impossible to simplify things too much, especially at the beginning. And in terms of the plans for the future, like Anoma would be progressively become more real because there are many components being developed, right? And Namada will be the first fully operational component of the whole ecosystem. So maybe we want to touch on Namada a bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think it's difficult to understand that something like take a lot of time and different component, and then maybe at a certain point it's finally that thing as a whole, but now it's like we are very early in the process. No?
Right. So should I describe Namada? Yeah. So Namada is an early product we're building kind of as part of the Anoma ecosystem, although it doesn't use all the same protocols because we're still designing Anoma. Some of the protocol details are like being worked out. And we need to make decisions now for Namada. Namada is just really it's a blockchain that uses Tendermint or Comment. It does not use the Cosmos SDK, but it's kind of like it will use IBC, it will be connected to the Cosmos ecosystem, and it's just focused on multi-asset shielded transfers. So allowing users to send around whatever assets they already have or new assets they might want to create in the kind of IBC connected ecosystem with very strong data protection. It's pretty simple. I'm always surprised that this thing like doesn't yet exist as a product in the crypto or blockchain ecosystem because I think it's just the most straightforward product. There are, of course, lots of blockchains where you can do transfers and where you can do transfers of multiple assets, but they all reveal all of your data to the world. And then there's Zcash, which has world-class privacy technology, world-class data protection technology, but only allows you to use exactly the asset. And at least our hypothesis is that there are a lot of users, such as me, who would like to send transactions, shielded transactions, but at least don't always want to use ZAC, right? Don't always want to use the Zcash. So that's kind of the product that Anoma is.
So it would be possible to send a lot of different assets like Ethereum or DAI or whatever without anybody seeing who I'm sending to?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. A lot of the reason I think this is important is it's just, we live in a world of global surveillance. And when you use a transparent system like Ethereum, the question that you really have to ask yourself is not only, is someone going to be unhappy with me for the thing that I'm doing now, but rather, is someone in the future, this transaction log is public forever, it's never going away. So is someone in the future going to be unhappy with me or prosecute me or cancel me or whatever because of the thing that I'm sending to the blockchain right now? And I find that absolutely terrifying. I don't want to use transparent systems at all because, we live in a very politically uncertain world, and regardless of what specific beliefs you hold, the chance that someone in power will disagree with them in the next rest of your life seems very high. So I think that basically means that transparent blockchains cannot be used for most practical purposes. People would want to use them, even for just sending assets, which is the simplest thing, right?
That's a good move to the next part of the interview, maybe on politics and the socio-political impact. But I just have a small question from the Poetic Technologies team, which I was hanging out yesterday with, and they asked me to ask you what you think about Anoma as anonymous machine architecture. They were laughing a lot, so I don't know what's the mean here, but
definitely. So if you the word Anoma, as far as we know, is made up. Of course, we were inspired by more things that we could track in some subtle, unconscious ways, but we didn't specifically pick it from anything in the world. But one reason we liked it is it's kind of like Anoma, nameless, right? So that's a bit similar to anonymous. I don't know, the word anonymous can carry many associations in sort of linguistic usage, and I don't know if all of them are accurate, but I certainly think that there's some interesting association there.
Okay.
Anoma, one thing, it really tries to be nameless in the computer science sense. There are no privileged assets or there are no sort of arbitrary decisions about specific parties in the protocol. And there's no need or name service. It's kind of not in the same way. You don't have a canonical one. So I think there's some interesting.
Okay. Yeah. Then speaking of global surveillance and the bad times we are living in, maybe the listeners want to know how Anoma could be useful for political purposes, how can help us to change the system, short term, long term, some examples.
I think the question is more like, what are the socio-political implications of such a new system?
Right. Well, first off, I guess I should say that I think they are like long and very uncertain, and not, I wouldn't want to be able, I wouldn't want to claim to be able to predict exactly, but
knowing that we can't predict everything.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, one way that I also think it's easy to like over attribute agency to technology. Technology is not neutral. I mean, it opens new affordances. It opens up space for people to do things they weren't previously, at least not previously practically able to do. But it's also not an agent. It doesn't itself make decisions, right? So, ultimately it will be people, using Anoma or Nomada who are making the decisions. The technology is there kind of as a tool. Our goal is to communicate what that tool does very clearly so they can make informed decisions. I mean, I think compared to the sort of current technological landscape, some people, small number of people, have access to kind of, let's call it privileged or like more capable financial infrastructure. Like people in government, or the CIA knows how to pay people privately if they want to. People in kind of positions of sufficient power in the current system that they're just not worried about being targeted, stuff like this. Like those people, they can freely express their preferences, whatever. Even if I disagree with them, like they're able to express them rather than the current system. But many people cannot, partially because some of these technologies, like sort of peer-to-peer credit, are just not practically available. Partially because they might, be kind of at the mercy of whoever is controlling the current sort of intermediated financial system. So if you do something that like PayPal doesn't like, your account will get closed. In many of the ways this works, financial surveillance and control works right now, you don't even have legal recourse anymore. It's just like the arbitrary decision of some company. And these companies are, driven by their sort of lawyers who are telling them to, close anyone's account if there's any risk at all, right? So, Nomada in the short term, I think just provides more space for people who might disagree with the consensus, the mainstream consensus, or disagree with what the powers that be kind of want or don't want to happen, to express their preferences by funding projects that they care about, funding people who they think deserve help, even, I don't know, paying for pineapple on pizza, whatever. I don't think that's, that applies. I don't know if it applies equally along the political spectrum, but it kind of depends on who is in power. Like if, right now the financial system is just very top-down control. So if someone on the left is in power, then maybe it's like hard to express preferences that are more right-wing in some sense. If someone on the right is in power, maybe it's hard to express preferences that are more left-wing. Different people probably have different views in their local context about like where that balance lies right now, and it varies. But I would say, at least my goal in thinking about the technology and working about the technology in this way is just to kind of, on balance, shift more, action capacity and freedom to people who don't currently have it.
I find it really very exciting that Namada in itself will allow for private transactions, which maybe, I don't know, to us in the privileged world is not a big deal, because like we are like relatively okay with everything, and we don't have like active oppression, at least most of the categories. But there are trends indicating that many of the governments of the world, and especially the big countries, are becoming very authoritarian, and they are adopting digital surveillance techniques. And so it's reasonable to think that in 5 or 10 years, everything that goes on a blockchain will be under the scrutiny of a government. And now Namada, as well as a lot of other projects and privacy coins and mixnets, are creating this alternative infrastructure for anonymous communication, transactions, and so on. And then Anoma could be kind of the long-term, like one of the protocols mediating between these different privacy technologies.
The other contrast I would want to draw in the case of Anoma is a contrast with the current architecture of SaaS companies and cloud services. So if we go sort of this comparison is a little bit reluctant, but I think that it's helpful. If you look at like Web 1, Web 2, and now it's kind of Web 3. So Web 1, users ran their own servers. This was a lovely world I would be happy to be in again, but For many reasons, it wasn't very practical. One was that many users didn't want to run their own servers. Another was that many users wanted to engage in like multi-party interactions, like getting a mob, getting a car. And so just running your own servers doesn't find that, right? Someone has to, mediate or provide counterparty discovery. So what do came along brings some, bad theories of capital, but in particularly in Silicon Valley in California, but also later elsewhere, it's become quite a whole lot now. But in Web 2, typically there's like one company who develops software, runs servers, contracts with someone like Amazon to run servers, and operates everything. And when this is true, Uber, Bolt, all food delivery apps, they're all software as a service. Like you kind of send your data to the company, you connect to their website, talk to the company, and the company will like build the application. And this means that these decisions are all coupled. So as a user, if you want to, use in theory, there's sort of an Uber protocol, right? Like Uber built a bunch of software that mediates interactions between drivers and riders, but that software is closed source. It's only run on their servers. So if you want to use Uber the protocol, you must trust Uber the company. You must send your data there. You must allow them to make profit and to do whatever they're going to do with it, etc. In Web 2. And I think that is, I think it's, it just reduces like practical freedom that people have. Like someone might want to use a protocol without trusting the company. And I also just think that it's super inefficient. Like there are all of these companies that are basically replicating the same ride sharing protocol. Like they're quite similar in the end. The apps look quite similar. They feel quite similar. The algorithms are probably mostly the same. Engineers move between the companies, but because it's all closed source and run on different servers, they just like replicate this work repeatedly. And the main reason that they replicate the work is that actually people care about like political distinctions, right? Like I, want to use maybe a more European company when I'm booking a car in Europe, opposed to an American one, stuff like this. So people have different reasons that they would trust and not trust certain things, right? So people want to make decisions about trust, but it would be probably more efficient if we could just all agree on a protocol, like TCP, IP, or email. But these are protocols from back in the day. People will build protocols and try to standardize them. And email has become very difficult to run your own email server now. That was going to be generating. Still, it's a protocol. And I guess with Anoma, part of the thing we're aiming to provide is a kind of distributed operating system on which you could run, like, for example, a car protocol, which would be an application on Anoma, where the protocol and the choice of provider, the choice of who to trust, are separate. So that everyone can kind of agree on the same protocol, because agreeing on a protocol doesn't entail that you agree on who to send your data to, or how to determine even which drivers you trust, stuff like this. So that, I think that, in Web 1, you could choose to run your own server or not. In Web 2, you can choose to use the service or not. With Anoma, you can choose to use an application fully independently of who you choose to perform ordering, compute, storage, and other kinds of responsibilities for these choices are deep. I think that there's at least reason to expect that kind of architecture just allows people to better express their
One of the things, this is still like a half thought in my head, but it sounds almost like an attempt at, you have this like efficient market thesis from like Hayek and libertarians, which I think is like a little bit silly about, markets moving towards like perfection or efficiency, and like basically it implies of like decreasing profit margins, because assuming that like consumers or people who are making demands are like actively always searching for lower and lower prices or something like that. But it almost feels like in an intent, a world filled with intents, that almost sounds like I'm imagining like everyone can then choose to make it's like a giant ordering book almost, where we're all able to make the intent of like, we all want like maybe like X price, not Uber, like this. So then you can almost make like it almost sounds like if really a lot of people are using this type of intent-centric architecture, then everybody can like really express what they want, rather than feeling like I only have the choices that are laid out in front of me or that I know of. So now we're in a world where like you don't even have to know whether or not there's a better option. You can simply express that you want a better option, and maybe there is like a company or a group or whatever that then sees like there's a lot of people who want like a better option, and maybe I can calculate a little bit like, you know, my profit maybe, or like my revenue will be this much because all these people have this intent for like either they want a non-Uber like at this price, and like that's you know, doable if we run as like a worker cooperative or something like that. Like, you know, then you can like start to configure how then do we make that? So I don't know, that's just something that's kind of running in my head. I think it's interesting.
One thing that is super in current markets, like the markets that we use, you know, especially with these SaaS companies, I would argue that there are a lot of preferences that just cannot be expressed.
Yeah.
Because the only preference that people can express is like, do I use Uber or not? And that's a very low preference. There's no way to see that, oh, like there's all this latent demand for an app that's like less, or a company that's like less shitty than Uber. If only someone would build one, right? So that signal like actually isn't in the market, right? And adding it to the markets could open up a lot of new opportunities, and not only ways for people to express what they want, but also ways for people on the other side who are like, you know, producers of Uber, like perhaps worker cooperatives, drivers, or stuff like this, to see, oh, like we don't have to work for this company anymore. We can like do our own thing. Here's all this like credible commitment. Here are all these credible commitments to demand people support us.
Also, just a comment. It's not often mentioned that most of the most famous tech startups and platforms like Uber, Airbnb, whatever, they are the champions of the old model and the platform economy, and they either just became profitable after 20 years of VC money burning, or they're not profitable at all. So it's like, it's not that now the system is so solid and it's so efficient. Like all the stakeholders are discontent with the state of the system, except the investors, because they are the only one extracting rents. I don't know, with Uber, like the drivers are underpaid, the users pay a lot. Uber is not profitable. Like, nothing works in like this efficient market. So maybe a solution could be to move to a tech stack which is more in line with how reality works and society works. So maybe a distributed system. And now it seems like very far-fetched and economically unreasonable, but the current system is just not working at all. And now we can say there is a lot of data. The startup I just run.
I also, at least, I absolutely agree with that. And in my view, Anoma is really like, in retrospect, it will probably seem obvious. Like all social systems in the world are heterogeneous trust. You know, no one was used historically, like even a money system where we accepted like one single canonical database. That's what, you know, sort of a world blockchain or something is proposing to become, right? And no, you know, what SaaS companies are doing where you kind of outsource trust and usually data, like you're physically sending all of the data to California. And you back to Uber, at least for many of these companies, this is true. That's just, I mean, from a physics perspective, it's inefficient. Like you're sending it across an ocean. The driver is, you know, 3 kilometers away. So why? It's just, it's unnecessary. And I think that's learning from not only kind of is heterogeneous trust clearly present in most social systems, and the only thing we're really doing is just translating this to this more kind of technical context. But also people naturally kind of expect systems to work this way anyways. Like often the apps sort of mislead you into thinking that you're, like I'm sending a message, you know, I use WhatsApp, or at least WhatsApp has some cushion now, but I use iMessage. I'm sending a message to, you know, my partner, but actually you're sending a message to your partner and Apple and the CIA, right? Like 2 recipients that don't show up. But you should, a more accurate interface would show you, it's like, who do you want to message? I want to message, you know, my girlfriend or my boyfriend or whatever, and Apple.
And not the CIA.
And I want to message. Those are the options that are actually there, right? So,
I don't know if you've seen like Ben Me or like, did you forget to ask someone? And it's like the CIA. Another kind of this, just because in my mind, I have it in my head of like socio-political implications. I don't know if you've thought about like I don't know, in the like the labor union context of like intention to go on strike, like this sounds like it's very similar to like the Byzantine, generals problem of like both labor union strikes and blockchains have this interesting property of in order for something to work, for this action to work, you need like a certain level of commitment by people to want that action to happen, and that they will commit to that. Commit can also maybe interchange with intend. They intend for that to happen, and so if you like, it seems like another potential like space for intending collective action potentially generally to happen. But yeah, I don't know if you're gonna.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe an analogy is helpful just to distinguish what Anoma doesn't do. So if you think of it, an intent is a way that you can make a commitment, and you can make it, or you can digitally sign it, you can sort of make it in a credible way, but it's still just like a message. So in an analogy, imagine an intent like a piece of paper that you write something down on and sign. So you can write it down like, I commit to, go on strike tomorrow if like the following conditions are not met. Signed, Christopher. Right? And then you can like circulate that. And, I don't know, if you have some very efficient labor union bureaucracy or whatever, I suppose it could process these kinds of things. Like everyone could sign their intents to strike or not strike under what conditions, and the bureaucracy could figure out like, oh, like here's our kind of collective position on this, right? It could aggregate those preferences. And the thing which Anoma is doing in this example is like helping with the preference application. It's not itself making the statements credible or not credible. So in the sort of social sense. So I could send an intent that says I will go on strike, but if like no one believes me, then it doesn't work, right? So Anoma doesn't solve that problem. But if there's some like social precedent that these things are meaningful in this context, and that people, historically when they have sent them, they have actually done what they promised to, then Anoma could potentially help with the kind of accounting bureaucracy.
Yeah. So far we did simple examples to make people understand, like, I don't know, the kebab, the car, whatever. But referring also to the limitations of Anoma, I think we'll agree that like the change in the political systems that need to happen, they won't happen through Anoma, and we need to, I don't know, to fight with our governments and to advocate for new policies changing how money, taxation, the economy works. And then if we manage to do that, Anoma will be even better a protocol to organize our society and our economy. Am I right? Makes sense? Because maybe we don't want to, again, to see Anoma as like the solution to the problem of the current systems, but like something that it makes sense. And then it will make even more sense after we do some collective action to change the structural problems, which are not technological problems.
Yeah, I mean, I would just see Anoma as opening up different affordance. There's a little different space for action that is not currently open, and this matters. The existence of encrypted communication definitely makes a difference in practice.
Yeah.
Sort of political organizing and other things.
Yeah.
If that didn't exist at all, we would look at a different world today. At least personally, I think it would be worse. So I'm happy that it exists. But encrypted messaging itself is not like doing anything except allowing people to freely communicate. The people are still choosing to go to the protest. The people are still choosing to like negotiate with their government or with their company, whatever it is that they're engaging in. The encrypted communication is just there to kind of allow them to do that sort of freely and with the strong protections of cryptography. Their information doesn't go anywhere else. Really want it to go. And Anoma is, I mean, it's like a bit more abstract, and it's more trying to provide an abstract interface for applications, not just communication. But it's similar in this sense of it's just like opening up more space for people to do things and express their preferences kind of freely. But it's still, ultimately Anoma and honestly, and money and markets in general are just like the kind of like imaginary database systems. Like they gain whatever causal that they can't make people do anything. People can look at a number and say, oh, according to this number, I will do something. But people still have their own sort of transcendental feel, right? So I don't want to over-attribute anything.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because usually, this is not the narrative in tech. And like, if you're a tech founder, you have to convince everybody that your tech is like
save the world.
Yeah. I was just thinking that like on Twitter the other day, you shared a paper about how to scale anarchism and cybernetic communism, and you said something like Anoma is an attempt to so in this direction. To what you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so the paper in question is a paper by Aurora Apolito, which is it was posted on CER several years ago. University of Society, it's really cool website. Check it out. The paper itself is, I don't want to endorse all the conclusions in the paper. I think people should read it, but I think it's interesting when reading. The paper itself is critiquing money, and it's also critiquing certain sort of historical attempts at what might have self-identified as anarchist organizing, and not on the basis that they were like bad or bad intention, but just on the basis that they didn't really ever scale. Like either they kind of worked in the local context of like a small community and helped our small community, which was great, or they tried to apply themselves in global context, like sort of state-directed communism, and just fell prey to a lot of the difficulties of like essential levels of power in the state. People enrich themselves, there was corruption, or actually, very stuff like this. And in particular, I think the author of her critique is kind of trying to get like anarchists to take math seriously. Like math is not opposed to poetry or something. The world is not shitty because of mathematics. She thinks that that's too far, and that rather the problem is that we have this currently very low dimensional mathematics. The money that we organize stuff on the basis on, we should try to design a higher dimension. And then in section 3 of the paper, which really, the historical sections they're interesting, but they're not maybe like, I can tell they were kind of written quickly. They're not the most grounded in all of the evidence. But section each, there are some mathematicians. You can tell where her expertise lies. The second very is very interesting. That section describes this kind of theoretical alternative system for measurement. That instead of trying to measure like, just some price or some decision about a number, tries to measure complexity. So it tries to measure like complexity of different objects, like perhaps parts, and complexity of like the latent potential for action or organization in a system, like sort of latent network system. So Anoma is not doing exactly that. It's more like Anoma is more like trying to give people the freedom to create many different kinds of measurement, which represent different things. They don't all represent the same thing, and like express their preferences as to how, at least they want to look at their own actions and actions they take in concert with others with respect to those measures, right? Whereas this paper is trying to define a particular measure. It's just a very different one. And I think it's an interesting one. I don't know the measure itself I think is quite difficult to compute. But maybe you can kind of approximate it in some ways. And it's not clear if you would, I still think there's some danger in like picking a measure and then allocating resources just based on that measure as opposed to always taking human inputs. So, I don't know if that's the right direction, but I think it's a very interesting one. And I would just love to see more like detailed engagement. So that was why I showed you on Twitter.
Cool. Should we briefly touch on governance of Anoma to conclude? Or you have any?
Sure.
Yeah. So as we said, Anoma is not fully operational yet as an ecosystem or as a protocol. But how do you envision the governance to work? Yeah, because it's a very complex system. Yeah.
So I think here it's important to distinguish between the three things which all occur sometimes have very no aperture, sort of a principle. So one is the protocol. The protocol is like mathematical abstraction code, right? The protocol is the thing that's permissionless. Protocol or right? The second thing is the networks. The network is like actual physical computers that run the protocol, connect to each other, right? Network is sort of physically the protocol. And the third thing is the token. So the foundation will propose the Genesis block at some point in the future for an Anoma token. And the Anoma token is only tied to the protocol and network in like a name. Like there's no, you can use the network and use the protocol without losing the token.
Yeah.
The user, that's a free choice that users make. Or we'll try and design token distribution, maybe some goods funding or different kinds of redistribution algorithms. We have some ideas to make the token useful. who want to kind of design something interesting that users use, but ultimately it's up to their free choice. So you can use the protocol network without ever using the Anoma token. You don't want to. And I think that is very so. In many of them, I mean, even if you use it sometimes, we expect that there will be like many tokens running denominations, settlers on the top. We don't need to use the token. Like, why do you need Anoma governance? It's like game, right? So governance. So I wanted to just draw that distinction just to clarify that like there are different things that are sort of governed right here. There are different ways. So the protocol is like an idea, and anyone can copy it and change it. I would argue that it doesn't really need governance. Like, there might be, I don't know, papers that people work on together of those types of governance. There's no scarce resource here, right? Like, if you want to take an element or change aspect of XY, you can just do that. You can tell the people about it, and if they like it, they get it off. The network, I would say, doesn't speak global. Like, so in the network, in the network, nodes are making local decisions about who they connect to and what messages they process. What messages they want to receive, what messages they want to send, and they don't need to like agree with all of the other nodes on what decisions they're making. So there is governance, but it's not like there's not one governance. There are many governances, I would say. You might want to engage in things that are kind of like not legal, but sort of like contracts with other nodes that I process messages for you, that you process messages for me, something like it's like mutual message processing. And this one could understand as a form of governance, but it's not something that needs to happen at a lot of full network level as well. And then the Anoma token will probably have some kind of governance mechanism over like future token issuance. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet. Or one option we're considering is a kind of intent-based governance, where a bunch of users, people who hold token in different ways, would not. It's not like voting. Like voting is like there's a specific proposal and you vote on it. This would be more like you express different preferences and sort of negotiate each other. Like, I think it's valuable to fund this public good. You think it's valuable to fund this other public good. Like, I'm willing to fund your public good if you fund my I'm sure there are versions of that that are reversed. So what exactly the trade-offs are that it's in a space is. But I also think, maybe this is a little bit extra weeds. Right?
Well, Namada, the first component, will be like a normal blockchain project, so they have a governance token.
It's more hospital style.
Okay.
I mean, there's still a protocol. We can still have the protocol for you, but there is like one blockchain, not one specific token. And that token can do whatever-based governance. It also has some optimal funding mechanisms.
Cool. I don't know if this is not too awkward of a question or not, but do you have any thoughts or plans? Because Anoma has raised, I think it was 50 million, something like this. How do you plan on, I guess, contending with the pressures of investors and whatever else on this type of protocol? And like, I imagine you will have pressure to make a token, pump the token, dump the token, whatever else. Like, do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Right. That's a good question in this program. I first want to kind of give a little bit of context as to why we did this in the first place. So unfortunately, I mean, right now the crypto ecosystem is weird. So one thing that's weird is that you can raise a lot of money without a product. This creates a lot of bad incentives. But it also means that you can do exploratory research as a startup. And this is basically like by startup, I just mean your company. And this is basically impossible like anywhere else in the world. Like Anoma just does a lot of research. Like we have researchers, we pay them competitive salaries. Some of them are like very selfless and will work just because they believe in the project. Some of them are not. I think that diversity in preferences is important. Like our job is to ship the thing that we promised, right? And for some of that, we need the ability to pay people competitively.
Respect your intent.
Right. So, we need to. I mean, we've done like years of research, frankly, and I'm very happy to have had the freedom to do that. We publish that in the open, anyone can use it. So that's part of why we like raise money, is it allows us to do that. We've also spent time kind of carefully constructing a governance structure, even for this money, that is sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but it's like investors don't have any control over how the money is dispersed. The money is stewarded by a foundation that's controlled by 3 founders, all ranging myself and I mean, we might make the wrong decisions or we might make bad decisions, but like there are decisions. No investor can force us to do anything. They can complain about it. They can like ask us to do things. So can everybody else. In practice, so far, this hasn't happened a lot. I mean, I think if we were like clearly doing bad things or like spending a lot of money on, I don't know, renting yachts, maybe they would complain, and perhaps rightfully so. So far, it hasn't happened too much. I mean, there is some, we spend time talking to them, we spend time talking to other market participants, and there's definitely like different people want different things. There's social pressure in that sense, and I think that we have to balance that carefully. I don't think that it has I think the thing that this governance matters for is like, can we ship the protocol or not? Like once we ship the protocol, things will evolve differently, and most of these other governance mechanisms of the protocol and network, and even the token are like not, they don't relate that much to like how we do fundraising or even our own decisions. They're more up to the participants than we're. So I think that it does, all kind of contracts and expectations you enter into with people carry some risks. And I don't want to, say that there aren't risks. Like, I don't know, if we spend too long doing research, maybe someone gets really mad at us and sues us, but like we haven't promised not to spend a long time doing research. We will. I think we should like launch a difficult one, but that's fine.
So, as far as you can disclose, like what kind of agreement you have with these investors? You have like a capped returns or something?
They have SAP contracts with the foundation. So the foundation, foundation is, in some sense, legally obligated to the Genesis block, will include some token allocations too.
So in a way, it's not really a VC investment, right? It's just VC funds, but the kind of, it's not like they want 10x in 3 years.
I don't know what people want. I can't. We have not promised that like prices would go up. We definitely not promised that.
Okay.
People could expect that. They could not expect that. I don't know. I mean, we pick who we work with carefully. We don't work with anyone who we think is sort of, intends us harm or just intends to make a profit. Like doesn't care about anything else. People have different preferences, and we also have to. Not everyone is going to agree with us on everything. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. No, I think there is something to say for, in crypto, rather than VCs getting equity, they get tokens for the most part. And there is, I think, I started to think about it a little bit more. There's a bit more room in that paradigm. It does mean that there is like, of course, I don't know, you saw with like Solana or whatever, like the investors, they get their tokens real cheap and then they dump it on retail. Like that is of course a phenomenon, but it also, because of the programmability of tokens, it does like allow for like different types of property relations than like a traditional stock in equity in a company kind of does legally.
Right. I think maybe I would want to draw a distinction here in the sort of like market structure problems between the actual like legal contract to get a token, which I think is basically, the thing that I think is kind of unfair about that is mostly that like we have to restrict that due to sort of existing laws. If the contract, the like expectations are clearly communicated. Back when we started Anoma, I think there was very little certainty that we could do anything interesting at all. Like crazy data. So I really appreciate the people who gave us the ability to try. We're thankful for that. And not everyone like has that kind of risk tolerance. Honestly, it's like super
right.
Easy. So I think that some pricing difference maybe makes sense. I think a lot of what you described in kind of investors dumping on retail. I think a lot of this maybe has more to do with sort of bad theories of money and like the market structure of advertising than it does like no one has to use the Solana token. Like if people want Solana, the blockchain, they can just kind of copy the code and like start a different thing.
Right.
But maybe that requires some organization. It requires some work to do. But the thing that the investor actually funded, like the production that they funded, is basically mostly stuff that public goes, like it's free. Like code this Solana blockchain. Our users don't have to use the token. Why are they using the token? I think it's some confirmation or these things being difficult to coordinate and coordination with other users. And a lot of people are also looking for like, they treat sometimes these tokens as an investment product. They're looking for like dollar returns.
Yeah.
But I don't think that you can, that's kind of, maybe I'm not saying they're right or wrong to look for that, but it's not necessarily a problem with the market structure.
No, sure. I think that what is interesting in all this at the same time is like, kind of a lot of what is created is kind of inherently open source a lot of the times. Like, I mean, I don't pay attention to Solana really at all, so I don't know exactly. I assume everything is open source, but yeah, we're in a very weird contradictory situation in capitalism, like in the crypto space, where a lot of private capital is going into open source products, and I think there is this ongoing kind of like back and forth of how do they capture that value, of course.
Right. I mean, I just kind of defended the market structure for a sec, and now I actually want to critique it. I think one thing that's really terrible about it is that it's super like top heavy and supply side driven. So most of the capital goes to like quote unquote layer one projects, which is like the stupid, like this doesn't mean anything. They kind of often they sort of gerbil it out to application developers, or like they, basically internalize a lot of the like various difficult to account for parts, research and engineering, communications and building these protocols. It would be much nicer to exist. Like, for example, we just have to raise a lot of money in parts because we like need to fund all of this stuff ourselves because it's not going to emerge. And I think it would be, for example, perhaps much better if more funding went to like the application layer, and applications sort of collectively funded the infrastructure and the research on which they depend. Because there's a lot of like duplicate research and engineering work. Blockchain projects that are like, I don't know, like a few dozen like big pools of money which kind of fund stuff in their ecosystem. And this is, I think it's not super efficient.
I just want to recommend to all the listeners the article by Trent McConaughey, which in this like I think is very relevant. It's called Capital and Enclosure in Software Commons. I mean, it's a very detailed, very well documented analysis on how now capital is trying to enclose these open source systems, because like it's open source, so how does it work? And we will also Twitter space with him was speaking about Ko-Fi and so on. But yeah, that's a key reading.
I helped him edit that.
Yeah, right. High length. So yeah. And I just mentioned that in the end of June, from the 30th to 4, we have a Ko-Fi event, the second annual collaborative finance gathering. It will be a retreat in Brussels. We will put the link in the info. And after that, we have another Ko-Fi event in Liège, more like on the local economy. So, but I think there will be room to speak about Anoma as well and all the other protocols into Ko-Fi.
Yeah, I guess I would leave this off with what we really like to apply is critique. Critique of the protocol, critique even our strategy, or critique of all of those things. I think, we live in a world that's kind of dominated by protocols, for better or for worse. Maybe there's questions as to whether there should be so many technologically mediated interactions. We've gone a little too far, but sometimes they're useful. But we don't have a lot of critique. And I would love to just, that's for us listening, a good critic is like the most valuable resource to have. Really far to it.
Cool. So the next thing going up is Namada launch, right?
Yes.
It will be somewhere, like, yeah. Cool. You are the host.
Yeah, no, I mean, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. If you want to leave any plugs for people to check out, to do more research on Anoma and everything else?
Yeah, I guess specifically I would plug, we built this kind of internal peer review system called Anoma Research Topics. Especially to Jonathan, Giulio, who's doing there. And this solves kind of the problem that we found in trying to conduct research, in that sometimes we would just do blog posts, but we needed something with like structure and papers and reviews so people could understand each other. And sometimes we would do academic peer review, but academic peer review is super long, like 6 to 9 months, and is really oriented around like adhering to the linguistic standards of a particular discipline, rather than making your work legible to people who come from different specialties. So we wanted something like much faster and oriented towards synthesis. And we found this super, super useful. And I think, it's both something that we invite external contributions to, readers of, critiques of, and that we hope that people will just copy as an idea and do more of in this space. I think it would be super helpful. That's, if you go to art.anoma.net, you can find all the details there.
Cool.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for coming on. And yeah, we'll stay in touch. Curious to see how it develops.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.